One of the things that this little pod does, and also that we do at the Varela Symposium, we have a whole sort of program mapped out. But the three of us are content maniacs. I don't know if you realize that. And we also meet, between sessions. And we actually decided to be merciful tonight. We thought more content is not what you needed. But John actually suggested I write the books. So I was like, thanks a lot. He'll help with the Sanskrit translations, he said. Thanks, John.
Seriously, I think a book on Bodhisattva activism would be fantastic.
Very needed. Yeah.
Everyone agree? See, Roshi? Not really. There are certainly books about engaged Buddhism, but nothing with the Bodhisattva angle at all, I don't think.
And then Roshi could help.
No, Roshi's much better at writing books than I am.
He's slow.
I'm slow, yeah. I write books that have footnotes inside the footnotes. I wish I were kidding.
So one of the things that we touched into, we sort of want to open up this evening, and then to Q&A, insights, and just more of a riff and less of a data download. But I talked about, I shared a story that was, I forgot who told me that story years ago, about a bodhisattva who I think blew it. And I just want to share it because not all, the story I'm going to tell is the one I hear. So I've always puzzled over this story. And the story is there's this prescient bodhisattva, all bodhisattvas are prescient, walking down the road, and he's trying to make the ferry to, get across the river. And because he was, clairvoyant and prescient, he actually realized that the ferryman, who had 500 arhats on the barge, he's going to take the arhats across the river, but that the ferryman was a really bad guy. And so he was just, I don't know, out of spite, just going to drown all the arhats. And so the bodhisattva saw this was the intention of the ferryman. And so he decided, and I think it's just a horrible story, he decided to kill the ferryman to save the ferryman from accumulating the non-virtue of committing, such egregious harm against the 500 arhats. This is, like being born in a Vici hell 10,000 times, reborn in Vici hell. And I said to John, well, for God's sakes, why didn't he just talk with the ferryman? Do you know what I mean? It's such a I much prefer the parrot story. Do you know what I mean? I don't like the story. So can you tell me what's the point of that story? I think, John, it's a really bad, story.
So the version I know is from the Upaya Kaushalya Sutra, and it's a little different. The Bodhisattva is the captain. He's the captain of the boat, and they're out in the outer ocean looking for the wish-granting gem with 500 merchants. But one of them turns out to be actually this ruthless murderer who's going to slaughter all the other merchants and take their money and the wish-granting gem once they find it.
Oh.
So, but it's kind of the same setup, except then what happens is that, the the boatman has a dream, the captain has a dream, and a sea goddess comes to him and warns him, says, in his dream, this guy's going to kill all the merchants. And so the next day, the captain kills the guy. So in some ways, it's a little worse because it's sort of, he had this dream. So I'm just going to kill him. But it's the same point. So the point of that story is actually a very complicated thing with the Bodhisattva is Like when do you have to
Engage
commit
in
in
the
some
prisoner's dilemma.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you have to commit something negative, or the famous trolley dilemma, right? You know,
Oh, yeah,
you can
trolley.
either throw a switch, this trolley's just going down a track, it can't be stopped, it's gonna run into 5 workers, so you can either throw a switch and it runs into 5 workers, or rather it's gonna run into 5 workers, but you got a switch right here, and you can switch it so it just hits one person instead. And it's like, and it's very interesting, actually. Joshua Green, in a book, Moral Tribes, which is a very interesting book, has written about the various versions of this trolley dilemma. And it's like, yes, there are, unlike the monastic vows, there are times when the Bodhisattva is even kind of expected to do something that might accumulate negative karma for the Bodhisattva, because it's going to avert something disastrous. But the issue there, and where His Holiness has talked about, this has been used in the history of like the Tibetan world, this kind of attitude to authorize, even assassinations. And Tibetans didn't really engage in outright warfare very much. Once they took over Central Asia,
Poisoned each other.
yeah, exactly. Once they took over Central Asia, which they did, I mean, they dethroned the Chinese emperor in the capital of Chang'an, and in the 7th century, 7th century, and they were the warlords of Central Asia, and then they became incredibly peaceful. Bob Thurman likes to talk about how what happened to these people. It went from being bloodthirsty warriors to monks in a relatively short period of time. But they continued to have kind of political assassinations and such. And part of it was this, like, well, sometimes the Bodhisattva has to do something extreme. And that's a very dangerous idea, actually, because the thing you don't know, and this is where His Holiness Dalai Lama has, commented on this more than once, is if we engage in something non-virtuous, that means we're doing harm. That's kind of the baseline definition of the non-virtuous, is it's harmful. And if we're going to do something harmful, we need to be sure that it really is going to be, that it's worth it. And it's really hard to know that, whether it's really going to be worth it. And, that doesn't mean you just let people, you can restrain people. You could talk to the guy and say, or, make a deal like, hey, you know what? We'll give you the wish granting gem if you just don't kill anybody or whatever. But no, that's not, anyway.
Well, I think this is a really actually important discussion. And that is that in our endeavors to be of benefit to others, we encounter moral dilemmas where the path forward is not clear. And where, as the trolley dilemma, that no matter what you do, harm will arise. And then the question that you engage in is, how do you actually work with moral residue? How do you work with the issue, as an aspiring bodhisattva, with what this kind of feeling that there wasn't a fine alignment with your values.
And actually, Roshi, I mean, the trolley, I'm really glad you mentioned the trolley dilemma, because the attitude from the Mahayana standpoint is there is a version, like there's a way out. And the way out is non-harm, where your just baseline is just non-harm, which means you don't do anything. But the Bodhisattva is supposed to help. So then what? And that's where it gets very tough.
So that was our discussion at dinner.
Among other things.
Yeah. So we'd like to, actually, I wanted to tell that story because we have, in the world of archetypes, often the shadow element is not articulated. And then I mentioned last night the distinction between motivation and intention. And I want to maybe parse a little bit on that issue tomorrow morning. I don't want to deliver more content. But it's to understand that the picture that, our aspiration to really be a benefit is sometimes at odds with what goes down. And yet still it is, we live by vow, and we're constantly correcting course. And, part of our discussion during dinner was, when there is a kind of allegory, like, the ferryman getting knocked off by the Bodhisattva, it's like, that's not a, why didn't he just talk to the guy? Like John Paul Lederach, who's one of the, great peacemakers of our time, is always, advocating for communication, person-to-person connection, and so forth. And, so my thing always with that story, it's like, just, sit down with the ferryman, let's have a conversation. Let's meet each other, warm hand to warm hand, face to face. And yet that sometimes is not what in fact happens. But what we really want to do is to receive questions or brief insights from you. So Dekila and John and I, to a certain extent, perhaps can add something.
I just have a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About the trolley, so you don't want to do harm, and it seems very apropos in activism. When is not doing something causing harm?
Well, yes.
That's it.
So
yeah.
We sometimes in the Tibetan world talk about the 3 vows. So there's the what they call the vows of individual liberation, the pratimoksha vows, which are the monastic vows, and also the 5 lay vows. And then one of which is not killing. But the root of all of these is non-harm for that at that level. And then the Bodhisattva vows are, and there's different lists of them, but they're active. So then, in a sense, one of the downfalls for a Bodhisattva is to not help when you can. And then the tantric vows are about like radical transformation, and the baseline for them is, if you're playing by the system, you've broken your vows. Like if you're playing by the samsaric rules, you've broken your vows. So Atisha used to say, who Dekila mentioned before, I pretty much never break my my pratimoksha vows, my monastic vows. Very rare. Bodhisattva vows, yeah, sometimes. But my tantric, the breaking of my tantric vows is like rain, in the summer. Like being not playing by the system is really hard to do.
Yeah, it takes a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
To play by that system.
Yes, and to not, in a sense, to not be samsaric is hard. Since it's under the skin, so to speak. But there are times when the Bodhisattva has to make a choice. And this the point of the boatman story, probably they should have had John Paul Lederach write that one instead. But the point of the boatman story is exactly this. Like sometimes you don't have a choice. You've got to do something. And this is where the trolley dilemma is helpful, because at the first level of the vow, the individual liberation vows, the right thing to do is to do nothing, because you don't harm anybody that way. But the Bodhisattva is not, she's got to do something, because somebody can help make a difference here. It's the person that I'm about to wipe out is going to give a cure to cancer, or can I know those things? But those are the kinds of very tough choices the Bodhisattva makes. But those are not meant to be like daily choices, or even in any, maybe most Bodhisattvas in their lifetime never have to face something like that.
Except it feels like that is the choice that we have to make every day. Where do we spend our energy and time? Do we go to the march? Do we go send money to this cause or that cause? It's like,
well, that's a little different than, so that the story is about actually choosing to do something that does involve harm. It doesn't even have to be violence per se. It's just it's harmful. And you can choose to do something that's harmful because it's really clearly going to create much greater benefit. But like you could, destroy somebody's property. That's harming. It's a kind of harm. Like, you're doing psychological harm to somebody, they're not going to like it. They're going to be upset. And yeah, and if the Bodhisattva is supposed to follow the local laws, whatever they are. And so if there are unjust laws, the Bodhisattva breaks them, and some people may be harmed by that. But those are choices. But it's a different than like the calculus of what's the most beneficial thing. That's always, of course, there. And the tougher question here, which is kind of interesting, maybe related to what you're asking, actually, Noah, is, well, like just by existing in the current system, we are always doing harm.
That's right.
So like, how do we do less of that? That's one way to think about it. And one answer to that is the pratimoksha version, which is you basically just renounce.
Yeah.
You leave, you just completely leave the system. But the idea of the Bodhisattva is the Bodhisattva doesn't leave. And that's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah, in our lineage, we have 3 valences related to the vows or to precepts. And the first valence, is Noah well knows, is the literal interpretation, which is you absolutely do not do harm. You adhere to literally to the vows. That's kind of the Theravadan approach, and that is renunciation. But the Mahayana approach is compassion, so it's completely context dependent. So, what is appropriate in one situation might not be appropriate in another.
Exactly.
And so it's spontaneous. But then there's the third valence. And I look at these basically as diopters, when you're sitting getting your eyes examined, they put in this lens and this lens and this. So these are 3 different lenses. And the third lens, we say it's the Buddhayana perspective. And that's the perspective of emptiness and wisdom. So, you're out of the system totally. You're, see,
it's like Tantra.
It's the tantric perspective.
Yeah.
But, if you're stuck in it, if you choose to operate out of any one system, there are flaws, there are problems with, being in the system of renunciation, or there are issues related to the Mahayana or being in the context dependent spontaneous system, or there are really deep issues in the Buddhayana or tantric system. And so, in practice, which through deep practice and insight, you're actually integrating these 3 perspectives. You're able to actually have this spontaneous realization. You're not saying, I'm in the renunciate seat today. Oh, tomorrow I'll be in the Buddhayana seat, so to speak. No, I think I'll sit in the Mahayana seat today. You're actually operating out of those 3 valences simultaneously. But it takes very deep practice because there are obstacles associated with the unique diopter associated with the Theravadan Mahayana and the Tantric or Buddhayana view. That's at least in our school, that's how we work.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about skillful means, I think it really is the application of compassion with wisdom, right? And we are now living in times where acting is hard, not acting is hard. That both of these choices create a kind of violence. And first of all, acknowledging how difficult it is, right? That we have not chosen this actively to have these choices in front of us, that these are systems that have been created that we're forced to participate in. But then I think somebody had brought up earlier this idea of taking a few steps backward, right? And looking at the system and deciding to engage with maybe the root cause of one of the threats, right? Understanding that everything is interdependent and that allows you to address other things. And so I think always giving yourself the freedom to seek the skillful means, where it isn't this either or, you either kill one person or you allow 500 arhats to die, right? What Roshi was saying is that where is that option of dialogue? And I think this is part of the polarization, this binary, that we're either doing harm or we're being passive, right? These are all binaries that are being told to us. And they are these messages are deliberate. Do you know who came up with recycling? The concept of recycling? It was a market gimmick by the coal companies that I put up, by the oil companies that I put up. Because what they did was essentially take the responsibility and guilt and put it on individuals. So we would be distracted from attacking them. It was a deliberate marketing tactic. So this is why I keep coming back to cui bono, who benefits? And every time we've experienced this guilt and this sense of paralysis, because we don't know which way to distribute our emotion, and everything is at a crisis point, we have to take a few steps back. This is where the practice, the compassion and emptiness practice, is so necessary for us, because we are making choices that are much further upstream, right? We're making that choice that is the best skillful means we can think of.
And, just going back to one piece, and then we want your questions. This is the problem with the three of us.
Yeah.
Please give us your questions, blah, 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 blah.
I know.
We can't wait to hear from you.
This session is yours.
This is all about you. I think it's time to go to bed, actually. Wasn't that meditation wonderful at 5:30? I mean, that was great, Dekila. And see, now I forgot what I was going to say, and we should be happy. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
It's a little bit of a follow-on. And that's with the do no harm. I'm going to say principle, because at where I work, we actually have that as a development principle.
Oh, cool.
Do no harm. And the companion principle to that is nothing about, and this is part of a localization policy. So I'm going to use the word them because it's the phrase, nothing about them without them. So it's like doing no harm. And then with the Bodhisattva action, but not being from like a particular community, and maybe this is for Dekila and like Loka. So then how do you know the proper action for a community that you're not a part of? So like, if you can talk a little bit more about the type of engagement or social dialogue that needs to happen to inform your action, so to help ensure that you're not doing harm. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is so hard for development groups and nonprofits, so I'll preface with that. The process is the product. Everybody bypasses trust building. And when these organizations go into community, even researchers that I know that go into community, it's like they're trust building to do something. So it's trust building. It's like, how quickly can I get out of trust building so I can get what I want done? And actually, trust building is the product. That is the reward. That relationship you've developed, the deep listening you're doing is the reward in itself. And so, Loka is producing this documentary. As I was telling you, one of the frightening things about saying you don't have a mission and you're coming to serve communities, they will ask you for something and you say yes. So I have zero film experience. And in this dialogue, what emerged was this desire for a documentary to capture indigenous traditional knowledge. And so I said yes, knowing nothing about filmmaking, but it's turning out to be a beautiful documentary. It took us 2 years to develop even a storyline. And our entire creative team is indigenous and native. Most of them are native to the Great Lakes. But it took 2 years of not rushing the process. And I have to tell you, I have donors that are like, so how's the film going? Well, we're still in the dialogue phase 2 years in, right? but not bypassing that process is so luxurious because there is no way to measure trust. There's no way to measure the depth of the trust that is created. And this idea that we have of time, this linear idea of time where we're just rushing through it, you know, it's incredible because actually we act like we live forever. And that's why we rush through time. And if we were to say to us moment by moment, hey, you're dying, you're in the process of dying, we would automatically pause. Everything that is in front of us would be so precious, right? Anything, the person in front of us in that moment would suddenly be so precious because we are in the moment of dying, right? And yet we forget this. We act like we live forever. So we're bypassing and shortcuts and always looking for the fastest way, the fastest download, the fastest internet, all of this, just this incessant speed. Whereas it seems to me that trusting the community to know what they want best and trusting them to be the experts means that, you know, we are present in this moment together. And what emerges out of that is actually the gift. Like that is almost the byproduct of what is in front of me, which is this human to human relationship. And it is hard when you are, you know, the nonprofit system is completely designed by the private and the public sectors, right? So they're just very like, I have funding for 3 years. I have 2.5 years to execute this project. And I got to go, you know, we send people in, they land, and they're supposed to start the project. And it's difficult. I don't know if that helps.
I would say, I mean, one thing, because I think the question is really picked up on something you said too, and which is that when you're just running by a bunch of rules, which is a rule-based ethic or a deontological ethic, sometimes that's good, and it's good to have those rules. Like, okay, you know what not doing harm means? It means don't lie to people, for example. But when one is going to actually try to help, the idea of the Bodhisattva is trying to become an awakened being, and one way of defining what it means to be fully awakened, the Buddha, is that Buddhas don't have their own reality. They only inhabit the reality of sentient beings. They don't have like their own perspective. Like they're not seeing the real reality. There's no such thing as that. There's only all of these interdependent conventional realities that overlap, but that also can, you know, be quite distinct. So every community has its reality that there, and you probably have even maybe experienced this in some way. Certainly if you work, you know, and I'm sure you have, and you know, as someone who's lived in both different cultures, and I've experienced this to some extent too. It's like there are just ways of being that can be radically different, and not just trusting those ways of, not just creating a sense of trust. Maybe I'm guessing that part of what it is also like being willing to inhabit, being willing to allow my reality to be inhabited by the reality of the other. And to not need my reality to be the true one.
Yeah.
To let go of like clinging to what I think I know is right, what I think I know is true, the way I know the world's supposed to be. And I'm going to, you know, go help you get there to my great place. But instead, it's like, what's your transformation? How would you make a Buddha field? What would your Buddha field look like? Because they are all different. There are infinite Buddha fields for infinite sentient beings, and they're all different. So, you know, there are Buddha fields, they say, where the Buddhas teach by smell. I don't know, they like lift.
They're dogs.
Exactly.
Yes, they're dogs.
Big
Yes,
old
true. Yes,
The Bodhisattvas.
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Where's Jaya?
Yeah, where's the dog? So, you know, like, I think that's a big part. That's challenging to really like enter, especially someone who you feel like is, you know, evil even. Like, to really see the world through those eyes. That's hard.
You know, I often quote in this regard this wonderful clinician, Rachel Naomi Remens. A lot of you heard me say this, forgive me for repeating. But she says helping, fixing, and serving represent 3 different ways of seeing life. When you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see it as broken. And when you serve, you see it as whole. And I think that, Marina, that's what, your rubrics or these slokas that you have, in the organization are, how do we serve in any given situation? That is only what a bodhisattva does. A bodhisattva does not fix. A bodhisattva does not help. We know that helping disempowers. We know that fixing has a view which is also disempowering. But when we serve the reality of a situation, including having the capacity to see that the resources, the wisdom actually is not what you're carrying, but what you're serving, whom you're serving, where you're serving. And I think that's the bodhisattva attitude that Norman Fisher writes about that is so critical. It is an attitude of service, not of I'm here to bet. Of course, the language that we say, in the vows is I will benefit all beings. Well, that's just a bloody ego trip. You know what I'm saying? And it's just completely top down and patriarchal. It's just the worst thing. And yet, we've instantiated, it's right in our Buddhist ethos. We've instantiated that grammar, which is completely top down. And it's the wrong grammar. It does not represent the bodhisattva attitude, an attitude that is deeply aligned with a view of Francisco would say it differently, but it would be the same, of not knowing, of radical openness, of being surprised, not feeling as if you need a rule book or an algorithm, to solve a problem. And the problem's actually already solved. It's just a matter of, co-recognition. Yes.
I have an example that may help. I don't know.
Great.
I don't know if it, but I'm a retired OB/GYN. And when I was trained, one of my best teachers, when he was a resident, had a very young patient who came from the tradition of Jehovah's Witnesses. And she was underage. So when she was going to bleed to death, they were going to do what they needed to do to save her life. So they got a court order and had her transfused. And as you probably all know, people who have this belief system of being Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in blood transfusion. They feel like it will send them to eternal hell. But my teacher, who was a wonderful teacher, and all of his teachers thought the best thing to do was to go to court, and they did that. And this young woman went home and killed herself. And he was my teacher. And he was a good teacher, very good teacher in many ways, not just this way. So when I was a pretty young new doctor, I had that learning, and I was grateful for that. And Jehovah's Witnesses started coming to me who needed surgery. And the first question they ask you is, will you transfuse me if I need a blood transfusion? And so
that's a moral dilemma.
That's a moral dilemma. Yeah. And so I decided not to do that. I talked with them, and I said that I would be very open to them changing their mind, and I would offer them the opportunity to do that several times, but that it was my hope and belief that never when I was operating on them would they need a blood transfusion, and that I would do everything I could to prevent them from bleeding that much. And luckily, the surgeries I did rarely needed blood transfusion. But so once I did that with the first patient, then guess what? I was it for every. So wow. I know that if someone had hemorrhaged and I didn't transfuse them, that I would be absolutely broken. But fortunately, no one ever bled. They all got through surgery okay. So, but I think that was a real moral dilemma for me. And I was lucky in that I never needed to transfuse any of my patients who were Jehovah's Witnesses.
I just want to reflect on something. There's a term that I've been sharing quite often in our community, a Sanskrit term that I think applies to the choice that you made and how you operationalized it. And the term is appamada. And it is translated commonly as heedfulness or vigilance or conscientiousness. And Stephen Batchelor translates it as care. And it is known as the elephant's footprint because this is within the great footprint of the elephant. All other animal footprints can fit into that footprint. In other words, appamada is this all-embracing process of conscientiousness and care. And what is interesting to me is that you applied extreme conscientiousness and care in relation to how you conducted yourself as a gynecological surgeon.
Also not knowing.
Well, it's not knowing, but the stakes were higher for you in terms of your conscience. And you knew that just, the slightest bit of casualness or, absence of care and conscientiousness or heedfulness or vigilance could actually cause massive loss of blood and put you and the patient in a horrible situation. Well, actually, this is the Bodhisattva attitude. And I just want to put this out there. This is such a critical piece in what we're exploring in this time together. That the stakes for even your stakes were life and death stakes in terms of how you conducted yourself as a surgeon in relation to the population you were serving. But actually, the Bodhisattva attitude requires of us appamada in all our decisions, all the choices that we make. So I thank you for that story, because this is one of the points that I wanted to bring up in the context of our exploration, that we actually are quite unconscientious, unheedful in how we often conduct our lives. And so it's not to make ourselves, sort of overwhelmingly controlling, so to speak, but it is this constant process of correcting course in the context of our lived experience to what will mitigate harm downstream, knowing that harm could arise. So anyway.
Although I'm not going to exactly
I'm
disagree with you, but
I know.
But I will say that.
Remember the lamb chops?
Oh yeah, but I will say that Shantideva has this very interesting thing in the first chapter where he says, like, even when you're being heedless, or even when you're asleep, that once you have bodhicitta, authentic bodhicitta, it still is producing a stream of goodness, so to speak. And which is not an excuse to just sit back like, oh, I got bodhicitta now, like I think I'll have a beer, but it's more
lamb
like
chops.
Or lamb chops, but more like this is when Matthew Ricard we were never mind. It's a long story. We'll tell it another time.
I want to tell it. You
But,
can't just bypass it like that.
I think you were the one who were the more disturbed by the lamb chops than Matthew.
No, Matthew raised his eyebrows.
He did.
So John and I were in a hotel in India on our way to Dharamsala with the Mind and Life community. And John, I couldn't believe it, ordered lamb chops. I was like, oh my God, you ordered lamb chops. Okay. And we're sitting together and Mathieu Ricard comes waltzing up, and I looked at
And
John.
he sits down and has dinner with us.
No, I thought you were going to drop the lamb chops under the table.
No, I know Matthew much too well.
No, he is not. He is very
Yeah,
much, he's very conscientious about issues related to animals.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's used to the Tibetans who eat a lot. And my sad thing is I can't eat anyway. I won't
That's
go
all
into my
right.
health issues, but let's just say there's a reason for lamb chops.
Well,
they taste good too. but
Yeah,
that's
well, you
not
look
the-
so guilty.
Yeah,
so-
of course it did. Matthew and I had a good laugh after that. But where were we?
Oh.
Maybe we'll just move on. We were talking about
No, conscientiousness.
So yeah, like I think part of it with Shanti Dev is you really don't want to beat
Yeah.
yourself up.
No.
It's like, I sometimes do this. Like should I use a paper towel? Seriously, this is one of the things I do. Should I use a paper towel or a towel? Because I'm going to have to wash the towel. And it's the process of washing the towel. Which soap do I use, by the way? And this one says it's Echo, but maybe they're lying. And is it actually better for the environment the way they produced it? And where did they ship it from? And and it's like, I'll just use the paper towel with that. But, and it's like, yeah, right. Wait, what's that? Use my pants, right? Here's an idea. Let's just say I get scolded when I use my pants, which I occasionally do. But yeah. But you don't want to get in that place where you're paralyzed.
Yeah.
Because the reason you're paralyzed is you don't know. You can try to know, but like there are certain kinds of things I personally do not have the capacity to know yet. So that's why wisdom is so important. And that's that practical wisdom. And the Bodhisattva has to learn that and help encourage others to learn it for them and then teach them and whatever, researchers or whatever. And there've been some really interesting work in that. We've heard of some about that, about the footprint and various attempts at apps and so on. Nothing's really worked out yet. But the point is, you don't want to be paralyzed by apramada, by being heedful to the point where you're just freaked out all the time and exhausting yourself. So, you snap at your partner or whatever.
And for people who do want to know what is, the best thing you can do, there is an organization called Drawdown, DRAWDOWN, that literally has measured everything individuals can do, families can do, communities can do, depending on where you are. And it's
Jonathan
really,
says
really
it's
helpful.
not quite that.
It's gone so much further in terms of like the
Really?
number of scientists that are involved. So, I mean, because becoming vegetarian is number 2 on the list.
Yeah, vegetarian is very good.
Number 1 is
yeah.
food waste. So,
Again,
that is actually.
I don't
So,
know if
but
I
what
should
I-
confess my. I mean,
No,
I'm
it's
not.
okay.
It's okay.
I know. I'll tell. I think I should.
eat
Because
meat
I
sometimes.
actually want people who are in my position to not feel bad. So
Yeah.
I have a condition. I have ulcerative colitis, and I can't eat beans. Although I did tonight, so I'm going to be in pain later. And I can't eat tofu. I was a vegetarian for 8 years, even with that, but I can't do it.
Thank you for
So
sharing.
so I think that's important to share because there may be
It
people
is.
out there or online who feel bad about it and they just can't do it.
I think, and I think this is why we were talking about niche earlier, right? We cannot be all things. We cannot do all things. We have to be skillful about what we choose to do. And the tearing that happens because we are being pulled apart to do 50 things when we only have the energy for 2, that has to become part of our practice. We have to bring that emotion into our practice so that we can center ourselves and go back and make the best choices we can. We will be useless for everybody if we pulled ourselves in 50 directions.
Yeah.
That's why I like Stephen Batchelor's translation of apramata as care.
Yeah.
Because,
Interesting
vigilance, heedfulness, conscientiousness feels coercive.
Yeah.
But I thought it was a very insightful
Yeah. It's an interesting idea.
perspective
Yeah.
on this, because and that for me manifests the Bodhisattva attitude. You're not careless.
Mhm.
You know, you're full of care. And that's the Bodhisattva attitude. Yes,
So many hands.
please.
Oh, were you in line?
I was waiting.
Okay, yes.
Oh, sorry, Penny.
So I thought I heard somebody say the word the other day in the beginning. I think Roshi, you said maybe you were gonna talk about forgiveness. And I've been thinking when you were talking about trust, there's a connection with trust, wisdom, forgiveness, and the Bodhisattva's work of serving. Can you speak to that?
John.
No.
No,
You're the forgiveness person.
no, you
I'll
are.
forgive you first.
Oh, no, I'm not.
You're the one who said it.
That is not my jam.
That is,
Yeah, Penny, we were actually talking about forgiveness, its limitations. That and I was giving this, it was in one of our discussions in the issue around forgiveness because of harms. And I gave the example of an interaction I observed between a white woman and a Black woman, where we were all bearing witness to a reconciliation process. And the white woman said to the Black woman, this was in Georgia years ago, "I am so sorry." And the Black woman said to her, "It's too early." And it was such, I mean, the whole room, you could have heard a pin drop, instead of "I forgive you," like Truth and Reconciliation in what happened in South Africa. Her message between these two sincere women, but with very different histories. The lesson that the Black woman gave to the white woman, which is forgiveness involves absolution. And that means that there is no full taking of responsibility. So anyway, that was the conversation we had in the thing. And I sort of went to, well, we'll talk about forgiveness. That's the summary of that conversation. So from a Buddhist perspective, the issues around fully taking responsibility at the level of your karma, your actions, is really critical. And this is what a bodhisattva does, is to actually nurture the context where one can awaken courageously to doing that.
And you Bodhisattva has to make a choice, a lesser of two evils, then she may have to forgive herself.
I don't know. I actually can't answer that. I'm not a bodhisattva. Yeah. Yeah.
it's interesting.
But again, in terms of one's intrapsychic process, and self-forgiveness, that's an interesting question.
I just would say, and you said something about bypass. I don't know if you remember what it was. Forgiveness as a kind of bypass, but
Right.
do you remember that?
That's what I said.
Yeah, okay. But I thought there was more. But it's one really interesting thing is like in the kind of Buddhist technical language, and even in Tibetan cultural language, one word that we don't have a real equivalent for is like feeling guilty. And then also in the Buddhist texts, like forgiveness is not a thing. Interestingly, there isn't like a thing about forgiving people. It's compassion. So seeing someone else, and feeling compassion for them being so confused that they harm you. But like somehow that it's just never formulated in terms of forgiveness. I've never seen it as a theme in Buddhist texts. Yeah, but I guess, It's a tough, and I think it's a lot of this is really maybe cultural, kind of like we have a very right.
Different.
Yeah.
I think there's also, it's a little sticky. It can trap you, You can lose yourself in that cycle of seeking forgiveness and validation, and it's all external oriented. And I think there is this element to trust, which is that moment when you start to trust yourself, and you trust you're not second guessing your choices, not because you've made necessarily the most effective, cost-effective, smartest choice, but you trust that the Bodhisattva vow that has set you true, you are going to fulfill that vow, and how it has appeared in front of you and the choice you've made. And so I think in general, culturally, this aspect of second guessing is very rare. I'd say even more in Tibetan communities than Himalayan communities.
Interesting.
And it's sort of seen almost like this is distracting. Your pursuit of forgiveness is distracting from the actual work that needs to be done. We do have this concept of shakpa, which is you repent, right? We do prostrations, you confess. So it is not that we bypass that we have made mistakes, but the seeking of external validation to make us feel better, that concept is very rare.
I'm glad. I'm just thinking about shakpa too. It's a very important practice. It's meant to be a daily practice, where you are reviewing the negativity when it's done, and then all the negativity in all of your past lives, and just sort of exposing that. And often, you visualize the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as your witnesses. But then another really interesting thing about that practice is it's always accompanied by rejoicing in the good stuff you've done. And, so on the one hand, we're saying, here's the mistakes and here's the things
and what did I learn here?
And what did I learn here? Exactly. And how am I going to do it better next time? And then here's the good stuff, which always comes second, by the way. So it's a good thing to remember. Rejoicing, anumodana. And also what you saw in other people too. So you rejoice when other people did, but then also especially yourself. So, maybe not especially, but also in yourself.
One of the things that I learned in working with dying people was that some days I was able to be really present, and other days I just was off. But I didn't sort of wake up in the morning with, I think I'll just do badly today. Do you know what I mean? I think I'll just, space out or feel exhausted. Sometimes my best was only that big. Sometimes my best was really pretty big. But I never judged my best in terms of its dimensionness. And, no matter what, so in terms of self-forgiveness, it's like kind of turning the thing around, seeing it from another point of view. Somehow blaming oneself is not necessarily a healthy thing. What is really healthy, I believe, is to do it, pretty much is this sort of Buddhist perspective. What did I learn from this? Instead of just, there's absolution without any revelation.
Share one comment, and I'm way in over my head here.
Me too.
So, but when I do a practice that I learned from my teacher sometimes around forgiveness, and it's simply, I forgive myself for not understanding. And it just opens it really wide.
Beautiful.
It's not about blaming myself. It's not about shaming myself, but it's also acknowledging that something didn't go the way that I wanted it to, or something isn't right, but because I didn't understand. And I just wanted to share that because it's been helpful for me.
Yeah. My thing is, maybe I don't do the first part, but the question I live with, what am I learning here? What have I learned?
That's very Bodhisattva of you. Actually.
I try. I fail often. Anyway, it's beautiful. But do you sort of get where we're going, Penny?
Yeah, that was helpful.
Yeah, great. Let's take one more question, Cleve. Or-
Actually, somebody else wanted to ask one,
Okay, Barbara.
but I do want to say that was my exact question.
Okay.
And I'll mention one other thing. After years of sort of not practicing family and work and all, I sat before a teacher and he asked me, "What have you learned in this time?" And I said, "Forgiveness."
Hmm.
And everything that you said is what I meant.
What did I say?
Write it down. Write it down.
Okay. Thanks, Cleve.
Is this
Yeah.
recorded?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I would like to learn more about engaged Buddhism way or insights on actively working to build new social forms. What I mean by that is new economies, new ways of organizing, prioritizing a different set of values. Upaya is a wonderful example of such a new way of organizing. Loka is another example. I love what, John, you said, you're bringing new courses, the way you present yourself, with your transdisciplinary knowledge of psychology, Buddhism. I call myself social chemist. I'm trying to experiment as well. And there is such a wealth of wisdom in Buddhism. And I'd like to hear your reflections, thinking into the future. I'm reminded of Thich Nhat Hanh, and the future Buddha is a collective. What is this collective? Earth Sangha was mentioned today. I see many new Sanghas emerging. I'd love to hear your reflection. What do you see emerging? What can we all do to give birth to this new emergence? How can we more work together to give birth to that? Thank you.
Well, Barbara, I'm gonna beg mercy. That is the most incredible question, and it is 8:44. So, and actually, to do justice to your question, I want to be mindful of our time. And just to say that your question is incredibly important because it points to the bridge between Buddhism and complex adaptive systems. And this is, in the work of Donella Meadows and Evan Thompson, and there's a whole huge world that, so we can't do it in a minute, but it is a point of departure that we should actually access tomorrow, if that is sane.
I think we were going to, I think the plan is for me to start with some stuff about in-group, out-group, and the formation of group and communal identities. So maybe we can, I've been thinking a lot about that too. I will say just briefly, and we should end, I know, but I will very briefly say that I don't know that Buddhism has great answers to that.
Yeah.
I think we have other resources, and I'm a big fan of The Dawn of Everything as a book that sort of says it doesn't have to be the way it's been. And indigenous communities, nothing that's come up so far is perfect, but I think there are other resources.
Joanna Macy's work is very aligned with where you're coming from.
But I think it's a great question, so hopefully we'll explore it tomorrow.
So apropos of, thank you for asking some great questions. Sorry we blabbed, but we got excited. It is our custom to chant the 4 vows. And so let us do that and find our way to bed. And to know also John and Dekila will be stewarding the meditation session in the morning. We will then from 7 to 8. And then breakfast, I think, is at 8. Is that right, Senko?
Yes,
Yeah, at 8 o'clock, and at 9:30, then we'll gather for our session, 9:30 to 11:30, just to remind you. And then some Samu time, just kind of setting things right. And as always, beautiful food for lunch. So thank you so much, my friends.